more on the two big results in yesterday's elections with potentially big implications for next year's presidential race. In the governor's race in Kentucky, NBC News projects the state's Democratic Attorney General Andy Beshear is the apparent winner and will unseat Republican Governor Matt Bevin.
No, by the way, little known fact, Willie,
Yeah.
Matt Bevin was ahead by 5 percentage points before Donald Trump went there.
Help me out here. Okay, so Matt Bevin, who aligned himself closely with President Trump and who framed the race as a referendum on Trump and the issue of impeachment. Interesting. The race was close, separated by about 5,000 votes, a difference of less than half a percentage in a state that Trump carried. Yes, we mentioned this, but it's worth mentioning again. By 30 points. Bevin was the only Republican running statewide to lose in Kentucky last night. He is currently refusing to concede the race.
So let's talk about this. We get to the Virginia legislature.
I got to get to Virginia. It's a good one.
In a second. It is, but
it's
Kentucky,
you can't get over Kentucky.
I'm just absolutely shocked.
Well,
I'm just absolutely shocked.
It happens.
That Donald Trump lost 5 percentage points in one day.
Okay.
So let's talk about it, Steve Kornacki, really quickly. Obviously, it wasn't just that Donald Trump and his candidate performed poorly in the cities and in the suburbs. They didn't run up the totals even in some rural counties that they had, that the Republican gubernatorial candidate run up 4 years ago. But it was mainly those suburbs, those Campbell and the suburbs up around Cincinnati, wasn't it, that really changed?
Yeah, they did. I mean, I think, look, when you have a Democrat winning in Kentucky and the margin is 0.4 of 1 point, it sort of ends up being a perfect storm. And basically everything that needed to go right for the Democrats went right for them. I think you're pointing to one of the major things. I think it was the first sign last night that Bevin really was in trouble. Boone, Kenton, Campbell counties. If you look at a map of Kentucky, sort of the northern group of 3 counties that kind of juts out. Cincinnati's on the other side of the Ohio River. These are the Cincinnati suburbs. And yet, in each one of those counties, relative to what he did 4 years ago when he got elected governor, Bevin was 10-plus points behind that pace. And he was also 10-plus points behind the pace that Donald Trump set when he won in 2016. So that was significant movement in pretty large in terms of population part of the state. About 10% of the state's population is just in those 3 counties. So that was a major problem, getting really just monster turnout, monster numbers out of Louisville and out of Lexington, the two sort of Democratic parts of the state. That was key. And then, yeah, there were, if you look really on the eastern part of the state, coal country on the eastern side of Kentucky, rural, blue collar. You saw a bunch of blue counties there and a bunch of red counties where it was close. That's a major reversal from what happened in 2016. It's just sort of a fascinating story in that part of Kentucky because what you have there is you still have, it's funny, if you look on paper in rural eastern Kentucky, there are still more registered Democrats than Republicans. It's just ancestral Democratic, I think, is the term you'd use. Folks, their grandfather was a Democrat, their father was a Democrat, they're a Democrat. But they voted big for Donald Trump in 2016. They're culturally conservative. And the hope in sending Trump in for that rally at the last minute, in part, was in places like that, where they still have some sort of old-time ties to the Democratic Party, but the voters really liked Donald Trump in 2016, that you bring Trump in there, and then those counties perform for Bevin like they did for Trump or something like that. That's where it fell short as well. You saw Beshear winning a bunch of those counties and coming close in some others.
Steve, you talked about turnout. It's estimated at 1.4 million. That's 400,000 more people turning out than the last gubernatorial election in 2015. That tells you a lot about the energy of voters. Let's talk about the Trump effect on this race. Obviously, he's running for the Hills. You heard Don Jr. running from the Hills. Donald Trump said again in a tweet last night that he made a 15 to 20 point difference in this race. That's, of course, not true. But how much did Matt Bevin tie himself to Donald Trump when his rhetoric on the trail, his ads and everything else? How much was this race about President Trump? To the extent he could, to the greatest extent he possibly could, because Bevin could read the same polls we could. I mean, his approval rating was measured at 34% as a group. Morning Consult's the pollster. They do every state, all 50 states. He clocked in as the second least popular governor in America when they took that poll at 34-54. He had all sorts of controversies there in Kentucky around teachers, around Medicaid expansion, around comments around that. So there were a lot of issues with Bevin
before this race that made him extremely vulnerable. And he saw tying himself to Trump and Trump's popularity in Kentucky as his only chance to defy that. And you could see in the end there was a lot of baggage there that was weighting him down.
Mike, hold on one sec. We want to go to Louisville, Kentucky. MSNBC correspondent Vaughn Hillyard is there. Vaughn, good morning. The city where you're standing, perhaps the suburbs there, Kentucky suburbs of Cincinnati, and Louisville as well, made all the difference in this race last night.
Exactly. I mean, let's just look at those two personalities of these actual individuals running this race. You have Matt Bevin there, the Republican incumbent, who is known as a rather brash individual. Many voters, they would call him a bully, somebody with bravado. In talking with folks, often mentioned to me was the fact of what he had said about teachers during the debate over pension reform. He called them, quote, selfish, accused them of throwing temper tantrums. When you're talking about teachers, everybody knows a teacher. And that seemed to really percolate, not only in the suburbs, but across these rural areas. And then you've got Andy Beshear, of course, the son of the former Steve Beshear, the former governor of the state. A much more soft-spoken man who I just talked to him yesterday. Up until the polls closed, he was talking about jobs, health care, education, pension reform. And so I asked Matt Bevin, who I should note yesterday predicted a 6 to 10 point victory, and he told me he hoped that it would be a 10 to 12 point victory. But I asked him, why did he nationalize this race? Because if you watch the televisions or if you listen to him on the stump speech, it was all about Donald Trump, and impeachment. So I put that question directly to him yesterday. This is what he told me.
Why nationalize this race so much and talk about President Trump so much?
I don't know if do you watch the news?
Oh yeah, last night I saw a lot of your ads.
No, did you? Okay, awesome. Do you watch the news other than political ads? Have you ever heard anything about President Trump anywhere in the last, 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
And you're running for governor of Kentucky.
Exactly, I am. But here's the irony. The fact that you ask why this is being nationalized and why people are talking about President Trump would indicate to me that you really have sort of maybe come out from under a rock, because here in America, that's pretty topical every night. Talk to the average person. Ask the next 100 people who come in here if they care about this impeachment process. And they will tell you, almost to a person, that they do, because they find it to be a charade. It's an absolute sham.
Nice guy.
That back and forth went on for a little while, and I asked him, you're not running for the House of Representatives, you're not running for the Senate, just trying to get clarification how you can help President Trump. And you clearly understood by what he just said there, politically, this is the place that Donald Trump won by 30 percentage points. And not only is it the suburbs, but also I think what Steve was talking about, eastern Kentucky. This is a largely rural area, coal country, an area that is looking for jobs. And talking with the campaign of Andy Beshear, what they told me was it was that part of Kentucky. It was that little incremental crunching of those margins in that eastern part of the state that ultimately saved them, put them in this race, and then gave them the victory here this morning.
And we saw in that interview some of the charm that got him a 34% approval rating. Vaughn Hillyard in Louisville, Kentucky. Vaughn, thanks so much. Guys, we should point out, too, that Governor Bevin has not conceded the race. The Attorney General in the state of Kentucky, Allison Lundergan Grimes, you'll remember her, the Democrat, she says that Beshear has won the race. The Senate president, who is a Republican, says, well, we might decide this. So this thing is still up for grabs. But as of now, by 5,000 votes, Andy Beshear is the governor-elect of Kentucky.
And you certainly did see some of the campaigning charms with Matt Bevin there that he shares with Donald Trump and why he really was trying to focus in. And again, just being difficult, rude, insulting, very Trump-like.
And for the first time in more than 2 decades, Democrats in Virginia have taken control of the State House.
Do you all like the color blue? I said, do you like the color blue? Because I'm here to officially declare today, November the 5th, 2019, that Virginia is officially blue. Congratulations.
Amazing. Thanks to unusually high turnout, especially in Virginia's suburbs.
There we go, the suburbs
Yesterday
again.
marked the 3rd election in a row in which Democrats made significant gains since President Trump was elected. Before Trump was elected, Republicans held a 66 to 34 majority in Virginia's state legislature.
So before Trump was elected, they had an almost 2-to-1 margin, Republicans did, over Democrats in Virginia. and now they're in the minority. That's breathtaking.
The sweeping victory will give Virginia Democrats control of the legislature and the governorship for the first time in 26 years.
So, David Ignatius, you know a little bit about Virginia and Virginia politics. What a dramatic change. A state that was on the state level, the legislature especially, just one of the reddest in America. It's taken 3 years of Donald Trump and his policies to reverse that, and now Democrats firmly in control of everything that moves in the Commonwealth state.
Joe, I think Virginia is a combination of Donald Trump, who just really is not the candidate of the new suburban tech-centered Virginia. And this Virginia result also shows demographic change. Virginia is a very different state from the place that Mika grew up in, was across the river from where I grew up in. It's a state that has really benefited from the tech boom. You don't think of Virginia as the Silicon Valley spinoff, but in many ways it is. I can't help but think, looking at these results tonight, that another few years we're going to be looking at a blue Texas. The same process of economic growth, greater suburban vote, demographic change. We're going to have a very different Texas. And you can go around the country and look at places that have been traditionally solid Republican that I think are in the process of change. But the Virginia result is overwhelming, and it shows something that's been going on for a while. Here it is tonight, or today.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
for sure.
There was, of course, that terrible mass shooting in El Paso where that paranoid mass shooter focused on immigrants coming in to Mexico, coming into Texas from Mexico as being the reason why Texas was changing. You also have some Republican candidates and Republican leaders also fearful of those demographic changes. But Texas is changing, just like Virginia, in the suburbs. You look at so many of those suburban seats in Dallas and other areas that went from red to blue. That's really, as we go into 2020, if you're a Republican, that's where you really have to be concerned. In Florida, along the I-4 corridor, in Virginia, of course, the suburbs of D.C. You go up to Philadelphia, the suburbs of Philly. You look around the suburbs, Mike Barnacle, you look around the suburbs of Detroit. In Macomb County, you look at these suburbs, and Republicans are just bleeding support because of Donald Trump.
Joe, there's no doubt about it, and you know the Kentucky story is big. There's no doubt about that. But the Virginia story is huge because when the governor, and you control the state legislature, Democratic governor, Steve, Democratic legislature, they can move on things like gun laws, on redistricting, on health care. So if you're a Republican strategist looking at last night, measuring last night's results, looking forward to a year from now, your next year's election, it's a shop-worn phrase, the canary in the coal mine. But if you're a Republican strategist, can you tell your clients, got to watch out because the canary is dead?
I mean, look, it tells you in the suburbs, a traditional Republican strategy, sort of a pre-Trump Republican strategy of relying on those suburbs, those sort of more upscale, college-educated, higher-income suburbs to deliver numbers for Republicans, or at least to allow Republicans to stay in the game. You need a new strategy. Now, the strategy I think that Trump is trying here is to drive up support from non-college white voters, to drive up support from rural areas, to drive up support from voters who maybe didn't participate in 2018, didn't participate in 2016, and to sort of add them to the Republican coalition to undo the losses in these suburban areas. The cautionary note is, in 2016, there was that famous quote, I think it was Chuck Schumer a couple weeks before the election. They looked at Pennsylvania, and he was basically asked, what about that Trump strength in western Pennsylvania, the rural part of the state? And Schumer's answer was, for every vote we lose there, we're going to get 2 more in the Philadelphia suburbs. Didn't happen in 2016. There was enough strong rural support there to give Trump Pennsylvania in 2016. Has there been further movement in the suburbs since then? Has there been further mobilization for the Democrats since then? And can that be offset by further gains in rural areas for Trump? I think that's the story for 2020.
All right, so Heidi Prisbilla, what are you looking at? Because one of the things, it's hard not to notice the shifts that are happening here, given these elections. You wonder if Republicans might start changing their tune, because isn't this the missing link when they go back home and face their constituents?
Given that this has been such a dramatic shift, like Joe outlined, you have to wonder how Republicans are going to respond in these swing states. Kentucky was really special just because in the last election in 2018, we saw all these suburban moves primarily in mid-Atlantic and coastal states, but Kentucky is like deep red Trump country. But my home state of Virginia, I just want to underscore that there were really two dynamics at play here. First is the suburban shift that you are all speaking of. And the perfect example of that is Fairfax County, which is one of these counties that used to go Republican a lot. It would switch back and forth. And now there's not a single Republican representative there. It is a clean sweep. Secondly is the role of gerrymandering. There was a court-ordered redistricting of packed gerrymandered districts around the Tidewater region where Republicans had drawn the maps to kind of pack African Americans. And this is one of these court rulings that have been successful for Democrats. So they were operating under a different map there. The truth is that Republicans haven't won statewide here since 2009. But you see here the role that gerrymandering has played in allowing Republicans to maintain control at the state level, despite the fact that those overall numbers of support are not there for them. So those demographics are definitely catching up. And to Mike Barnicle's point, this is going to have huge ramifications on a policy level in terms of gun control, the minimum wage, and then secondly, with that big 2020 redistricting around the census.
And it's very important to remember that the NRA lobbyists, the three lobbyists for the NRA, who, of course, are mired in a lot of investigations right now and charges of corruption, they're based out of Virginia. And Virginia governors, Virginia lieutenant governors, Virginia attorney generals, Virginia legislators have been running for rational gun safety laws, whether it's background checks or whether it's the banning of military-style semi-automatic assault weapons. They've been doing that, and they have been winning. At the home, again, of the NRA's national lobbying force, where their three lobbyists are, who, of course, again, mired in just unbelievable corruption charges. But Steve Kornacki, you know, we took note several times after President Obama left office that the Democrats' biggest problem at the time wasn't just the loss of the presidency. It was the hundreds and hundreds of state legislative seats and congressional seats that were lost during Barack Obama's 8 years. What we've seen over the past 3 years is a complete reversal. Donald Trump appears to be responsible for an equally dramatic loss of Republican seats, and he's giving Democrats statewide across the nation pretty extraordinary opportunities here, and really did the same thing in the House of Representatives last year, which, again, we can't underline it enough. The greatest landslide loss for Republicans in terms of vote totals in the history of our republic.
Well, I think one of the things we've learned, I think, in modern politics, it's just one of the peculiarities of it is there is nothing better in some ways for a political party than losing the White House, going into opposition. I mean, we've seen this time and again. You go back to the 1990s, Bill Clinton becomes president, Democrats get complete control of Washington. 2 years later, as you well know, Joe, Republicans get the Republican Revolution, massive gains that had eluded them for decades. George W. Bush becomes president. In the 9/11 election in 2002, it was good for Republicans, but by 2006, complete total wipeout. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, second terrible election for Republicans in 2008. By the time Bush is leaving office, total low ebb for Republicans. I remember the stories that were written about where the Republican Party was back then. Barack Obama comes in. Magically, Republicans have a massive midterm 63-seat gain in 2010. Tough years for Democrats when Obama's president, outside of the presidency. And then, of course, Trump comes in, and boom, 2018, the Democrats come back to life, and you get all sorts of results like we're talking about in Kentucky last night. It's just been very hard for any party to get power in Washington, to get the White House, to get the House, to get the Senate, to act on that power, and then to get rewarded by the public for their decisions they make. We haven't seen that piece of it basically at all.
So let me ask you, Steve, one final question. What's the one takeaway? What's the canary in the coal mine for people looking at these results, trying to predict 2020. What was your big takeaway last night?
Well, yeah, so my question was basically, look, what can you look at in Kentucky that you could potentially extrapolate nationally? And that's why I thought those suburbs of Cincinnati just jumped out at me, because you can think of places like that in a lot of different states. And so the question I have is, when you look at those 3 counties where Bevin was running way behind where Donald Trump ran in 2016, if you replicate that in other states, huge trouble for Trump. And I think it's a question, because what you'd hear from Republicans this morning, what you'd hear from Trump folks this morning is, hey, the other Republican candidates who are on the ballot in Kentucky, there were 5 other Republican candidates who won yesterday, most of them convincingly, didn't have those struggles in those 3 suburban counties, but Bevin did. So if it's truly Bevin specific, then Republicans, maybe it's not as dire as it seems this morning, but if something happened there with Bevin that can be extrapolated with Trump in places like that around the country in 2020, that's a huge problem for Donald Trump.
And by the way, also a huge problem, Mika, for Mitch McConnell. Moscow Mitch, as some of the kids are calling him now, around Lexington and Louisville.
It sticks.
Moscow Mitch has stuck for him. I don't know what, but Moscow Mitch has stuck. But he's at they say everybody's saying Bevin has low approval ratings. His approval ratings almost double that of Moscow Mitch's.
They look pretty stunned.
18%.
Yeah.
Moscow Mitch has 18% approval rating right now in his home state. You look at that map, and suddenly that race looks competitive. Hey, Willie, we need to put Steve Kornacki back in the Austin Powers-style cryogenic egg that MSNBC has for him during elections, so he can be rested for tonight.
Yes.
You know what, though? The energy's always there. He walked in 45 minutes asleep. He's got the sneakers on, always ready to go. That's the Kornacki edge, the rage.
That's it.
It's the
Kornacki
edge.
And I love it when he does hardball, except for the Open. Steve Kornacki, thank you so much.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.